It's time for Real Estate 101 with the Karey Brown team from Realty Executives Preferred Advisors.
Good Sunday morning to you. This is Karey Brown, broker, owner of Realty Executives Preferred Advisors, and you're listening to Real Estate 101. Today I am here with Teresa Baker with Housing and Credit Counseling, and she is the rental management director for Housing and Credit Counseling.
That's right.
So, Teresa and I are going to be talking about what landlords need to know and what tenants need to know. Because, of course, those are real estate-driven things. And investors, I would say, most of the time they're looking for bottom line. But at the same time, there's the rental aspect of that in there if they choose to hold the property. What are great tips that you would say a landlord needs to know going into it if this is their first time?
A tip I would say is the number one thing that I see landlords doing incorrectly is that they don't treat their business as such. They just put up a for rent sign and they put an ad in the paper to rent to a tenant, and they don't know the laws involved and the codes involved. That's a common issue that we see.
And I know you guys offer classes about that. How can they get involved and come and listen to you speak?
They can call us. We have classes a couple times a year in the city of Topeka. We have a free class in April that we provide in conjunction with the city of Topeka, where we teach landlords and tenants in a separate class their rights and responsibilities, and that covers the Kansas Residential Landlord and Tenant Act, as well as fair housing law, and also just common issues that landlords deal with.
And what would be a common issue you think landlords, we may as well just go ahead and get them in there and have them get a good idea of what they're getting into. What are common issues that you see other than, not trading as a business and dealing with tenants?
One of the biggest things is at the very beginning, they're not pre-screening their tenants properly. Sometimes landlords have a big heart, and maybe these tenants have some issues with their credit. They haven't paid their rent in a timely manner in the past, and they give them a chance. Second chances are wonderful, but once again, it's really important to treat it as a business if you want to stay happy in the business, and also you want your business to be lucrative. So it's a good idea to set up a good screening practice in writing. You have to treat everybody the same to comply with fair housing laws.
Do you guys have contracts that they can, structure their things off of, their paperwork?
We definitely do. We have a sample lease agreement that complies with all the laws. In fact, all the statutes are listed on the lease. We also have numerous forms for landlords to use for their business. Most of the forms cost $1 or $2. And then if we counsel you, we give it to you free of charge. Actually, we counsel, hundreds of tenants each year, and we don't counsel as many landlords. We would like that to change. We're a neutral party. We want to help landlords in their business practices. I've been in rental management myself in the past, so I know both sides of the equation.
And I know software helps out significantly. Do you guys have specific ones that you use or recommend?
We don't.
Buildium is one that I have used for a short time. I thought, well, let's get into rental management and trying to divide my time. I decided that it was better to stay in real estate and do what I know best than to take on a new project. But Buildium is one that it's not very expensive. They have a lot of marketing through that system that it can get you out to several different websites. And also, if you decide to manage other properties, it'll give you ways and leads to do that also. You can track each property separately. You can insert your documents, like your contracts, complaints, charges. So it's an actual bookkeeping system also. So I would definitely recommend looking at that. It's BUILDIUM.com. So let's talk about things that you see in housing itself that landlords should be better at to make tenants happy.
The number one issue would be deferred maintenance. When a landlord is not complying with the law and local codes, and sometimes they're not even aware of specific codes. This is a big issue, especially in specific neighborhoods in Topeka. It's very important that a landlord complies with the law. The Kansas Residential Landlord and Tenant Act actually outlines specific things the landlord has to be in compliance with. One of those things is he has to maintain the systems, the plumbing, the heating. This is surprising to some, and I don't even want to talk about it as cold as it is right now. But he does not have to supply air conditioning in the state of Kansas. But if he does supply it, he must maintain it. So He also does not have to supply appliances in the state of Kansas, a stove or refrigerator, for example. However, if he supplies it, he has to maintain it. Unless he puts in his lease, I'm going to give you a stove, but if it ever breaks down, I'm not going to fix it, or you will have to fix that yourself.
Wow, that's good to know. So as long as it's there and it's existing and he doesn't or she doesn't put in writing, then what you're saying is if it's there, they have to fix it.
When it applies to appliances only.
Okay.
Yes.
And then air conditioning?
Yes, in the state of Kansas, he does not have to supply air conditioning, but if he does, he must maintain it. He cannot put in his lease, I'm not going to maintain it. If it's there, it has to continue.
Wow.
And sometimes, when it's an air conditioning unit, a central air unit, and it breaks down, a landlord decides to replace that with, for example, one window unit. That's not in compliance.
Gotcha.
Because it's not going to cool the entire house, and it's not what the tenant paid for in the beginning.
And another thing as landlords that you should look at is home warranties. They do cover rentals. So if you need information, give us a call at 785-213-5188. We can certainly provide different ones for you to look at and research because they are all different. Some even cover pre-existing conditions where others don't. But we found them to be very helpful in real estate in general. In your classes, what do you guys discuss?
We go over step by step the rights and responsibilities of a landlord. We talk about their obligations under the law and what could happen. So, for example, let's say that the landlord is not complying with the law and he is not maintaining the heating unit and it goes out in the winter. The tenant has some options. The tenant can either give the landlord a 30-day notice of landlord noncompliance, which gives the landlord 14 days to make a good faith effort to address the issue. If he does not fix the issue or start working on it in 14 days, the tenant can walk away from the lease 30 days after their next rent paying date. The tenant also has the right to contact code enforcement. This gets a little sticky when they contact code enforcement. The landlord is usually not happy about it for obvious reasons. He's going to be given a certain amount of time to address the issues. If he does not address the issues, then code's going to assess a fine to him. Sometimes in these situations, unfortunately, a landlord retaliates against the tenant. And many people don't realize this, but there is a retaliation ordinance in the city of Topeka that no other city in Topeka has. It states that if a landlord retaliates after the tenant has requested maintenance and contacted code, that the city could go after that landlord. Also, the landlord cannot terminate the lease agreement for 6 months after that tenant has called code, because oftentimes that's how they retaliate. They say, well, if you're in a month-to-month lease, you have to be out in 30 days now.
Wow. So that's good to know because a lot of times, renters aren't aware and they think, well, it's his house or her house and I can do whatever I want,
I have to stress, though, that we do want landlords and tenants to get along. When they call us, we don't just say, hey, call code. It's usually our counsel lasts anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half because there's a lot of other issues going on sometimes with these tenants. Maybe they're not paying their rent, and that's why they want to call code enforcement. It's never been an issue, and suddenly now that they owe the rent, they want to call code. So there's some retaliation on their part, too, that the law doesn't address. So.
Yeah, that's an excellent statement because there's definitely two sides to every story. You've been listening to Real Estate 101. We'll be right back after the break.
Southwest Topeka has a good neighbor. State Farm agent Jim Garrison, now at 29th and Urish. If your current insurance situation has you going around in circles, get off the roundabout and stop in and meet Jim and his wonderfully efficient staff. Let Jim Garrison give you a quote and make the Garrison comparison. He's confident that with State Farm's competitive rates, the right coverage, and his unmatched service, you'll want to make him your new insurance agent. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there, and Jim Garrison is there for you, northeast of the roundabout at 29th and Urish.
Thanks for listening to Real Estate 101. I'm Karey Brown, broker owner of Realty Executives Preferred Advisors. If you're a landlord looking for good investments, give us a call at 785-213-5188. And be sure and ask us for our spreadsheets that help you figure out what you should be netting and how to figure your expenses. And we also have great information about software available out there. Obviously, we have no income coming from that, just great things that we've found that we'd be happy to share with you and show you how to use. Also, I'm here with Teresa Baker with Housing and Credit Counseling, and we're talking about things that landlords need to know and tenants. Thanks so much, Teresa. Let's talk about your tenant counseling, any kind of classes you guys offer.
Well, first of all, we do offer one-on-one counseling for tenants, and most of our counseling is conducted over the phone. And we also offer classes for tenants. It's much easier to have a classroom full of landlords. They want to learn their business. Tenants, they're more reactive. We wish they weren't, but they are. So it's harder to get them to come to a training. But we do offer free trainings for tenants. Many social service organizations contact us and ask us to come in and teach the tenants that they serve. In those types of classes, we explain to them their rights and obligations under the law and their lease agreement. We explain to them that they need to read their lease. That's one of the most common things that they don't do is understand their lease. They don't know that a landlord can charge late fees if that's outlined in the lease. And those late fees can very fast snowball. And once they snowball, they're not going to be able to catch up. So it could be $25 charged for the first day they're late and $5 each additional day. So you can see they're going to have a hard time catching up. We also explain to them some things that they can do if they do have some credit issues and are having a hard time finding a landlord. We also have people in our classes sometimes that have past felonies. And we don't want them to waste their money going all over town paying a $25 application fee when they're going to be denied in the first place. So we really teach a lot of life skills. One of those life skills is to, before you pay that $25, talk to the landlord. Say, I have this, this, and this on my credit. Are you going to accept me? They will typically say, I'm not going to accept you. So there's no sense in wasting your money. But, we also tell them to dress for success. Go in there like you're going for a job interview. You're going to have to sell yourself because your credit is not going to sell you. There are some landlords that will rent to people in situations where they have some credit issues, and those are usually going to be mom and pop landlords. People that own market rate housing apartment buildings, they usually can't do that because they have a set of rules that applies to everyone. For example, it might say that we can't rent to anyone who's had a felony conviction in the last 10 years. That's going to apply to everybody. They have to treat everybody the same or they could be in trouble with fair housing law. So.
I know that I've seen that regardless of the position that they hold in life as far as jobs are concerned, you really, really have to look at the credit and take that into account. It's one of the reasons why I got out of it is because really high-profile jobs didn't bother to pay their bills. Landlord let them move in, never pay their deposit, couldn't get it out of them, wouldn't pay their rent on time. So, and it just, really wanted to help a person out, but at the same time, that the funds were there and still didn't bother to pay their bills. So if you're looking at credit scores and if they're in the 500s, you really, really need to look at it and say to yourself, if they don't pay their rent, how long am I going to let this go, and make sure that your contract and the laws are clear and you understand them, because you can't let them move in and just bump them right out. It's not that easy.
Yes, and sometimes what landlords do is they're very nice and they will let the tenant go month after month owing rent, and they don't understand that there's a provision in the law that says that if you ignore evicting a tenant in this manner and you've always accepted late rent, then that may waive your right to evict that person. Now, will you be able to eventually evict them? Yes. But the first time you go to court, a judge may throw it out because you've always accepted late rent.
Wow. So you really do have to be proactive, and that's the statement she was just saying, Teresa was just saying, is you really do have to treat it like a business. I know everybody wants to help somebody out, but at the same time, you just have to understand that it's important to treat it like a business.
Right. And when I was in property management, I used to sit down with every tenant when they signed the lease, even though I did not have time, and go over the lease agreement with them. You want to have a meeting of the minds, especially when you're dealing with a brand new tenant, someone's very young, and explain to them, this is what's going to happen if you don't comply with the lease. You will get a 30-day notice. I will evict you. If you don't pay your rent, you will get a 72-hour notice to pay or move out. If you don't pay or move out, I will legally evict you. Explain to them what a legal eviction is going to mean to their credit. Other landlords are not going to want to rent to you if you have a legal eviction.
I know I've seen in the past where landlords forget that they need to give notification to a tenant. Can we discuss that, what the law actually states they should be doing?
Sure. The law does not actually address a time period, but courts have upheld that a landlord must give 24 hours notice, either verbally or in writing, to enter the property. If the landlord does not give proper notice, the tenant does not have to allow them in unless there's an emergency. And that would be there's, water running through the property. There's a fire. The landlord thinks that the tenant has been harmed in some way. Other than that, if the landlord tries to enter and the tenant doesn't want him to, the tenant can actually call the police.
So that's definitely something to remember. I know that I've actually seen where they've gone in and not notified the tenant at all for no other reason than to just check the property to make sure it's still in working condition. So,
and on the other hand, I would recommend that a landlord inspects their property with proper notice on at least a 6-month to a year basis. I cannot tell you how many horror stories I've heard from landlords over the years that have not inspected their property for a couple of years, and then when the tenant moves out, they find horrible conditions. They can't even believe it's the same rental. So it's very important that they inspect that renter.
Yes, and just, make sure that they know that you're coming. We would do bi-monthly checks, and we'd also do quarterly checks. I'd say that at some point that kind of feels like an invasion of privacy, but we left it up to the landlord to determine how often, and it was written into the contract, so the buyer or the tenant did know. What would you say is really an understandable amount of time to go in each year?
I'd say every 6 months to a year. You don't want to invade on someone's property. The main goal in renting is to keep that tenant. You want to keep that tenant year after year because turnover costs a lot of money. So that's where landlords sometimes make some errors when they try to, they get into a contentious battle with a tenant over very simple issues. Instead, it's better to keep that tenant in place.
Absolutely. And a good tenant is really hard to find.
They are.
So if they're paying their rent, they're as good as gold. Really go out of your way to take care of them.
Another common issue that we see is landlords not understanding fair housing law. If most landlords will probably recognize this as a big issue these days, and that is pets and service animals. Service animals are not pets, and many people now understand their rights under fair housing law and ask that they have a service animal even if a landlord has a no pets policy. Landlords will deny them, and they cannot do that under the law. They have to allow that service animal or companion animal or therapy animal. They're named a couple of different things. They have to allow them under fair housing law. If they don't, they can face an investigation by the state of Kansas, Human Relations Commission, or HUD.
So how would a tenant prove? Because obviously there should be proof that that is the actual title of the pet or the animal. What information would they need to provide to prove that that's accurate?
Well, the landlord, you can't tell someone has certain disabilities. So the landlord has every right to say, well, bring me some documentation if he cannot tell. For example, he can have his own form and ask the tenant to take this to the doctor to fill it out. We actually have a form at Housing and Credit Counseling to make it easy for a landlord or a tenant. But a tenant doesn't have to use a form. They can simply get a prescription from their doctor for their service animal. We also have a form that just identifies that a tenant does have a disability. They can give it to their doctor, and it just certifies that this person has a disability under federal law, and it explains to the doctor what a disability is under federal law. We like for landlords to use this form because we know, unfortunately, with every good thing, there are bad things, and we know that sometimes certain tenants take advantage of this right, and the doctor doesn't even know what he's necessarily signing. So we want that doctor to know what the definition of a disability is. One more thing to point out about this is that a landlord cannot ask for a deposit for a service animal or a companion animal, even if he normally does, and he cannot ask for any type of pet fees. But he can charge for damages. So if the tenant moves out and this animal has caused damages, he can charge for those damages.
What other things would you say are common errors that landlords make?
Not returning a security deposit or an itemization of a deposit in a timely manner. Once the tenant vacates the property, the landlord has 30 days to itemize damages. And that doesn't mean 30 days to put it in the mail. It means 30 days to go into the tenant's mailbox, new mailbox. If the tenant doesn't give them a forwarding address, then they can send it to the last known address, which is their rental address. Once it finally comes back to the landlord because they didn't turn in a forwarding address, then the landlord should not open it, the envelope. He should keep it filed away. So if the tenant ever calls him to court saying he did not itemize damages, the landlord can prove that he did. Let a judge open that to prove it.
What would you say are legal ways of getting damage repair funds back from a tenant?
Well, first he starts off with that itemization of damages. It's a good idea on that itemization if he puts down how fast he wants them to pay the bill. So within 10 days, within 30 days, he should probably make it reasonable. Oftentimes they don't see that money, unfortunately. So in that situation, a landlord can take them to small claims court for up to $4,000, up to 20 times a year if you don't have a life. Okay, and then at court, even if they're awarded those damages, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get those damages because the tenant may not have the funds. If that happens, then they can either turn it over to a collection agency or they can do a garnishment of wages.
So what would be the standard way that you see them go in and collect?
The standard way is they take them to small claims court. So I tell landlords, even when they're upset and say, I'm not getting the money from the tenant, at least that tenant now has a judgment on their credit report, and the next landlord's going to see that. And it does make some of them feel a little bit better about the situation. But, if they had inspected that property all along, they would have seen that there were some issues, that this tenant wasn't cleaning, and there were maybe holes punched in walls, and they could have addressed the issue right then and there and given that tenant a noncompliance notice and possibly terminated the lease, instead of now waiting 2 years later and they have all this damage.
And really great idea is to take before and after pictures so that you can show the condition of the property before, the condition in which you saw it in after. If you go in for, say, your 6 months check and you do pictures then you can obviously start taking action at that point, correct?
That's right. The law does say that a landlord and tenant have to jointly inventory the property at the beginning of the lease agreement. Everything needs to be put in writing. They both need to sign, and they both receive copies. And pictures, of course, are worth 1,000 words. A judge has more time to look at pictures, by the way, than he does a video. So pictures are better in that situation. I want to point out, though, some tenants think that a landlord has to do a move-out inspection with them. They don't have to do a move-out inspection with them.
So they can go in after they've vacated?
Mm-hmm. And there's good reason for that. Nobody wants someone looking over their shoulder. It's an uncomfortable situation. Most landlords don't want to point out, hey, I'm going to charge you for that, because they don't want to get into any type of a verbal altercation with that tenant. They just want to be able to assess damages.
Absolutely. So in talking with tenants themselves, what would you say is great advice that you give them to understand that they can't just go in and mistreat a property, and how that's going to ultimately affect them? Sure.
So we explain to tenants, first of all, that they need to maintain the property, and that it is not their property. For whatever reason, sometimes people, when they've lived there for a while, they sort of get the sense of ownership. And we have to explain to them, when you want to paint your walls KU blue or K-State purple, okay, that, the landlord may not like that. So you need to ask permission, read your lease to see if it's okay to do that. I also have to, from doing this for years and years, I understand that not everyone was raised the same, and one man's clean is another man's dirty. Some people just were not raised with those skills. So sometimes the landlord almost has to show them, this is how I'm renting it to you. This is how it needs to stay. Clutter is one thing, but filth is another thing. So, and so we also tell tenants when they're to read their lease and see what it says about cleanliness. And at the end of their lease agreement, oftentimes it will say you have to have the carpets professionally cleaned. If you don't comply with that and have those carpets professionally cleaned, and maybe you rent a rug doctor, well, then you're just out that money, because the landlord can charge you for what it costs him to professionally clean those carpets. And I want to point something else out about maintenance. When a landlord is charging you for damages because you didn't maintain the property, he does not have to fix the things that he's charging you for. So if you've ruined the carpet, he can change that carpet out and charge you, but he doesn't have to replace that carpet. So people are often surprised about that. And since I mentioned carpet, I want to say that a landlord can't just charge for the full replacement of carpet. Instead, he needs to take into consideration the useful life left on the carpet. He can charge for the useful life left on the carpet. So if the carpet is, decent carpet, not excellent, and it's supposed to last for 5 years and the tenants live there for 2 years, he can charge them 3 years left on the carpet. Now, the law does not say what I'm saying. This is just what's been upheld in court.
Okay. So basically it's in a depreciation type situation.
Yes, it is.
All right. So, again, Buildium, I get no money at all for referring them or anything, but you can actually log all your pictures and keep track of that in there too. And you can keep your receipts from when you put in the carpet. So it's a good place to have it all in one place. Regardless of how you do it, I would think that having a software where you've got everything readily accessible is going to help you, because paper files, if your house should burn or any kind of, if you're not keeping it in 2 different places, you could end up wishing you had. I know fires happen and, water damage happens, and you just want to make sure that you kept really good records in multiple different places.
And you mentioned, damage happens, a tenant should have renter's insurance. The law doesn't say they must, but a landlord can require them to have renter's insurance. It's a really good idea, and it's so inexpensive.
Absolutely. It really is inexpensive. And as tenants, if their house should burn down, and correct me if I'm wrong, and you do not have renter's insurance, their insurance is not going to pay to replace your things.
Right. We often tell tenants that the landlord is not responsible to replace your items. There would only be very few instances where he would, where it's his gross negligence caused a fire, but that's very unusual. Usually it's the tenant's responsibility.
And I would say, as a landlord, things to understand is, yes, you're going to make money off of these tenants, but at the same time, if you wouldn't live there in the condition in which you have that property, you're not doing anybody any favors. You need to keep your properties in good condition. For one, it helps the city. It helps you. You're maintaining your investment. So if you're not maintaining your investment, just hold a big old pile of cash and just throw it out the window. That is your savings in a literal form. So if that's how you treat your savings, you probably should think twice about being a landlord. Maintain your properties. It's the right thing to do. If you can push on a wall and it actually moves, you are not maintaining your property. There are areas in Topeka to where people are living in absolute horrible conditions, and the landlords, honestly, you should be ashamed. You should be taking care of that, because no one should live that way. Granted, there are people that live there and they can't afford any different, but, have some pride about your money, your investment, and consider, how you're requiring them to live. If there's a lot of mouse droppings, that's not healthy for anybody. Mold, not healthy for anybody, and it is truly a waste of your money to keep a property that's in that condition.
I couldn't agree more. There are many excellent landlords in the city of Topeka, but the bad ones make us all look bad. And unfortunately, we have to deal with those landlords that are a little unscrupulous. So.
Absolutely. So let's talk about how they can get a hold of you, website, all that kind of information, so that if they're looking to get landlord advice, tenant advice, where they should be calling.
Sure. You can contact us at 785-234-0217. We provide free counseling. Your name is placed on a call log, and then we call you back in the order in which your call arrived. I also want to point out that we also have a bilingual counselor who speaks Spanish and English. And you can reach us by email at hcci@ks.org.
And give me your website.
www.hcci-ks.org.
Thank you so much, Teresa, for being on the show. We know that this is not always the most pleasant conversations to have with landlords and tenants. The laws are still there, and there's still reality. If you're looking to buy investment properties, we have some really great spreadsheets to help you calculate whether or not it's a good investment and return on investment. So be sure and give us a call at 785-213-5188. Check us out online at TopekaRealtyExecutives.com, and email us at preferredadvisorsteam@gmail.com. Thanks for listening to Real Estate 101.
Thank you for listening to Real Estate 101 with the Karey Brown team from Realty Executives Preferred Advisors. Tune in again next Sunday at 11 o'clock for Real Estate 101.